Hello and welcome. So, congenital anomalies. I know, it's a very clinical-sounding term, but it describes something that's just deeply human. Today, we're going to cut right through all that complexity and put together a clear and, I think, compassionate guide to what this all really means.
You know, every single developmental journey is completely unique. But what happens when that path takes a bit of an unexpected turn? Thinking about that question with compassion and clarity, well, that's what we're here to do today.
So to kick things off, what are we actually talking about when we use a term like congenital anomaly? Let's start with the big picture.
Okay, so here's the formal textbook definition. A congenital anomaly is a structural or functional variation that happens while a baby is developing, and it's something that might be identified before birth, right when the baby is born, or sometimes not even until later in life.
But let's put that clinical language aside for a minute. In simple terms, what we're really talking about are variations in development that are present from birth. It's really about the incredible diversity of how humans develop. The term covers a huge range of differences, and they generally fall into two main buckets. I find this visual really helps make sense of it. On one side, you've got structural anomalies. These are all about the physical shape of a body part. Think of something like a cleft palate or a heart defect. And then on the other side, you have functional anomalies. These affect how a body system works, like a metabolic disorder or something that affects hearing. And of course, this all leads to the big question, doesn't it? Why do these variations happen in the first place? So let's dive into the fascinating and often complex science behind the why. Now this chart tells a really surprising story. You might think we have clear, straightforward causes for most of these things, but just look at the data. Sure, genetics account for about a quarter of them, and environmental factors for about 10%. But look at that huge green slice, 65%. For nearly two-thirds of all cases, the cause is either a super complex mix of things or it's just unknown, and that is such a critical point to understand. So, for the cases where we can pinpoint some factors, they tend to fall into these groups. Genetic could mean something that's inherited, or it could be a brand new spontaneous change in the genes. Environmental usually refers to exposures during pregnancy. And that last one, multifactorial, that's the most complex of all. It's that really intricate dance between our genes and the world around us. And this right here, this is probably the single most important takeaway from this entire explainer. In the vast majority of cases, these variations happen with no clear or preventable cause. Genuinely understanding that helps shift the entire conversation away from blame or guilt and moves it towards support, which is where it belongs. Okay, so how do families and their medical teams actually learn about these conditions? That brings us to what you could call the journey of identification, the whole process of detection and diagnosis. It's really important to know that detection isn't usually a single aha moment. It's almost always a process. It might begin in the first trimester with some routine screening tests. Then, a detailed anatomy ultrasound a bit later in the pregnancy can offer a much clearer picture. And for some, the identification doesn't happen until after birth, during a physical exam by the baby's doctors and nurses. And the goal here, let's be really clear, is not just to find something. The goal is to gather information, because that information is what empowers families and their doctors to prepare, to make plans, and to make sure that a new baby gets the absolute best care possible right from the very beginning. So once a diagnosis is understood, what happens next? Well, the focus immediately shifts to the pathways of care, and these are all about support and making sure that quality of life is the top priority. You can see this supportive approach is a journey in itself. Of course, it starts with getting an accurate diagnosis. And from there, sure, it can involve medical or surgical treatments if they're needed, but it absolutely does not stop there. Therapy and rehabilitation play a massive role. And just as importantly, so does real, meaningful support for the whole family and from the community. It really is a team effort. I love this quote because it gets right to the heart of the modern approach. The goal isn't just to correct a difference. It's about providing the support, the management, and the tools to empower each and every person to thrive and reach their own unique, full potential. Okay, so for our last couple of thoughts, let's zoom out for a second and try to put all of this into a broader perspective, really focusing on the human element at the center of it all.
Because when you get right down to it, learning about congenital anomalies isn't just about medicine or biology. It's about deepening our understanding of the vast, incredible, and sometimes surprising spectrum of human development. It's about recognizing that this kind of diversity is just a fundamental part of who we are.
And that brings us right here to a final thought. Understanding all this, it's not just an academic exercise. It actually changes how we see each other. So the real question for all of us is, how can we use this deeper understanding to build a more compassionate, a more inclusive world? That's the conversation that truly matters. Thank you so much for joining me.